We've covered what's deemed the worst. Now it's time to go to the best. Ladies and gentlemen, this is one of the two cases that is considered to be the peak of the series. It's also my favorite, so I do agree. But that's all in the past. My opinion of these games are outdated, so let's see if it holds up. This is Farewell, My Turnabout. The first 30 minutes are awesome. We get a cool cutscene with the Nickel Samurai slicing the moon, and we're in the Gatewater Hotel with Will Powers from the first game. I like how they bring back Will Powers. It's natural because he was our client, and it's nice seeing him return the favors from Phoenix. In fact, we get hit with many character returns. Oldbag is back, Lotta is back, and look at that, the bellboy is back as well. Oh my god, why does he look so creepy? So he says Maya has a call, and then this man proceeds to kidnap Maya. He wants an acquittal for Matt on guard within 1 day, or else he'll take Maya's life. Yeah, the stakes are crazy. Having so many returning characters and a familiar premise makes the start of this case so much fun. There's no time spent getting to know these characters because we already know them, which speeds up the case and makes its introduction better than most cases in the series. The killer also makes a good first impression with his unsettling design and theme. So Phoenix asks if Matt is the killer, and Matt says no, so the Cyclops don't respond. I feel very iffy about this moment. Like I said, when looking at case 2, the Magatama doesn't work well as a story element. Why does Phoenix not do this for every witness in the game? I don't know. It can help him get leads as to who the murderer is. And the Magatama isn't even consistent. This is a problem we already saw in Reunion and Turnabout, and there are moments like this in Turnabout Big Top as well, so how can we even trust the Magatama? I just feel like the Magatama should stay as a gameplay element and not be incorporated into the stories of these cases because it creates a lot of confusion. However, the beginning also has some great moments of humor. This one line from Phoenix stands out to me as one of the most funny lines in the series. It's a bit messed up with Maya being kidnapped, but I was dying of laughter for a good 2 minutes. Pearl in general is used very well. Phoenix breaks the news about him and Maya not being a couple, which breaks Pearl's heart, but she chooses not to believe him. There's also a lot of filler conversation with the different television programs that Pearl can watch, and it's fun seeing her go through the dilemma of choosing which TV program is the best. It's not plot relevant, but I found it enjoyable nonetheless. Wendy's Cyclops breaking is also hilarious. 3 Cyclops breaking from 1 evidence is just a crazy thing to see, and then the 1 Cyclops breaking just seconds after makes this moment even better. I will say the crime is nice. Just like with the Reunion and Turnabout, there's a lot of info that you can put together, and you can definitely see why Gumshoe says there's too much going on. You have this messy crime scene, but you have this 1 glass of juice left on the stand. The victim was strangled but also stabbed. Yeah, there are a lot of weird things going on. There are some scenes that bring intrigue with this first investigation, such as the scene with Shelly the Killer and Maya, which creates a suspenseful atmosphere, but I find many parts in between to be uneventful. I think this is mainly due to Oldbag and Lotta. Sure, Oldbag has the funny Cyclops scene, but overall, we already know what the deal with Oldbag and Lotta is. Lotta wants a scoop, and Oldbag is obsessed with movie actors. We spend so much time dealing with these two, and the conversations with them are mostly uninteresting. We also meet Adrian Andrews, Matt's manager. Adrian has many interesting moments right off the bat. If you present Will Powers' profile, Adrian talks about how being nice isn't enough to live in this world. She also talks about the childish nature of Juan and Matt. You can sense her hatred, and I do think it's well done. Oh yeah, and Edward's also back. A few of you might be wondering why I never mentioned anything about the overarching story of the game. Basically, throughout the game, Phoenix was angry because Edward left a note that he's never stepping back into the courtroom. Phoenix interpreted a part of this message as Edward taking his own life, and because of that, you get a few scenes where Phoenix lashes out at Maya and Gumshoe. Well, at least that's what he tells himself. Phoenix's thoughts are expanded on near the end of the case. The reason why I never brought up this overarching plot is because I had no investment in it at all. Despite being a huge fan of this game, I never liked the overarching plot with Edward's potential death. Phoenix's reaction to the situation felt very unnatural. I don't know what it is, but every scene with Phoenix getting angry because of Edward just feels out of place for me, and my investment with this part of the game is non-existent. I don't know if I'm alone in thinking Phoenix's reactions feel off for his character, but yeah, it's probably my least favorite part of his character so far. I also feel like this is where the investigation becomes confusing to navigate. You have to somehow know to present Celeste Impacts' profile to Edward, because apparently he did research on her, and there's also this weird part where he gives you part 1 of a report, so I thought, okay, he probably couldn't get his hands on the second part yet. I'll come back later to get that part as well. But no, you just have to present the first part of the report, and then you get the second part. If that's the case, why didn't he just give me both parts at once? This may not seem like a big problem, but when you're wandering around from place to place figuring out what to do, a lot of time gets wasted, which bogs down the investigation. Again, different people will get stuck on different parts, and this section right here was the part that caused me a lot of trouble. We also learned that Maya finds a card just like the one Adrian Andrews was fiddling with. This is a plot point I really like, because it leaves you with a lot of questions. Where did Adrian find this card, and why is the same type of card near Maya? Well, we go into the trial and learn that the killer shot Franziska, so now we have a trial with our old buddy Edgeworth on the other side. The first two testimonies from Gumshoe are pretty good. We get more information and show that the knife wasn't something the killer brought to the crime. Almost instantly, we see a full bar penalty for the first time. Thankfully it's pretty easy since they give a lot of hints, but it also does a good job making sure the player feels the intensity of the trial. Oldbag's testimony starts fine, but I'm not a fan of the knife contradiction. For context, there's this point where Oldbag says Matt was wearing the costume the moment he stepped to Rita. You have to present the knife because there's fingerprints on it, the logic being that if On Guard wore the costume, he wouldn't leave fingerprints. However, my question was why he couldn't have just left the fingerprints before he did the stabbing. The game does address this by saying that if he wore gloves, he would have wiped all previous fingerprints clean due to the glove marks. Isn't that strange? How can wearing gloves just wipe away every single fingerprint? And if we are to take this as a fact, then this is just something that I could never know to be true. Again, I always go back to Turnabout Goodbyes because teaching elements are important. Turnabout Goodbyes did it right, as it taught the player about ballistic markings. But there's a much bigger problem with this that we'll get to soon enough. We catch Oldbag as the camera thief and find a photo of the nickel samurai with sagging pants, which leads us to the conclusion that Adrian is in the costume. This was another full bar penalty that kept me on my toes. The full bar penalties are used very effectively. They aren't thrown in for every single question or testimony. No, they're thrown in just a few times to make you pay attention and feel nervous without being annoying and intrusive. Adrian's cross-examinations are solid. The contradictions we find with the guitar case and drink are fun. Adrian confesses that Juan set up the press conference and how she helped out with that. It's also nice that Adrian tells us what is needed to prove that someone is the culprit. She says you need 3 things: a motive, an opportunity to commit the crime, and decisive evidence. I still question some of this, like in Acro's case, the bust was decisive evidence. But let's say we couldn't find a motive, what then? Does that mean we can't pin the crime on him? Doesn't that sound very ridiculous? I'm at least glad the game did confirm its stance on why the motives were brought up, but I still find it strange. Phoenix finally accuses Adrian of committing the crime, as she is the most likely culprit at this point. However, Edgeworth correctly brings up the fact that Phoenix's claims are circumstantial. Now this is the point that makes no sense to me. You know how Phoenix claimed that Matt couldn't have stabbed Kurita while wearing the nickel samurai suit because they would have erased his fingerprints on the grip? Well, now he's accusing Adrian of being the one to stab Kurita. The problem is, we know that Adrian didn't leave fingerprints, so she must have been wearing gloves. But according to Phoenix's previous logic, if you wear gloves, it's gonna erase previous existing fingerprints, meaning that Adrian would have erased Matt's fingerprints. This is something the game doesn't even address. It uses a certain type of logic to progress with the case, and then pretends that train of logic never existed. There is some good suspense built up as Phoenix tries to buy time. The judge is about to postpone the trial, but Phoenix begs and shouts Maya's name. That is enough for Edgeworth to know that something is up, and he helps us extend the trial. It's a really cool moment that reminds me of the final trial in Turnabout Samurai, which was the first instance of Phoenix and Edgeworth working together. I will say I think the placements of Lotta and Oldbag are fairly confusing. Apparently while Adrian was in Juan's room, she was able to see Lotta and Oldbag through the peephole. Apparently she could see both of them from that angle, and apparently in that time, Oldbag somehow stole Lotta's camera? Like, damn Lotta, how did you mess that up? She must have put her camera down for like 5 seconds for some reason, and then Oldbag just swoops into action and steals it. And then I guess she hides around the corner of the hallway, and it's even more weird because how did Lotta not find Oldbag? Like, Oldbag was just waiting in the corner to take a picture. Did Lotta not look around the area to find the camera? There's so much about this part that's not explained well. After that cross-examination, the trial is over, and we see JFA make some good use of its presentation. Phoenix has this devastated looking sprite, and it's great to see it being used for the first time. They easily could have used the sprite in previous cases, but saving it for this moment gives a lot of impact, as it lets the player realize how horrible Phoenix feels for not being able to save Maya. The silent courtroom is also a good way to set the atmosphere. Edgeworth questions Adrian about the card she's holding, and this changes the entire course of the second day. Overall, the first day is good. It has its problems, but the overall pace is good, and it's enjoyable throughout. However, The second day is far, far better. Phoenix calms Pearls down by saying that Maya may still be fine because Matt on guard has not yet been proven guilty. Some may say this is a cop-out because the condition was that Matt on guard should be found not guilty within one trial day, but I think it's fine. I can see the killer telling Phoenix to finish it off in one day in order to put some pressure on him and then giving him a chance for a second trial. We even get some funny Edgeworth dialogue as he doesn't realize Dr. Hottie is a fake. We learn that an assassin is most likely the true killer of Kurita, and then we're brought back to a Maya scene. These Maya scenes are really great just because of how suspenseful they are. I mean, once we open the door, we're greeted with a picture of Celeste and a bear. There's a lot of good dramatic irony as the player gets to know more than both Phoenix and Maya by having two perspectives. And we got this awesome moment where the killer finds Maya and captures her once again. So at some point, Matt asks Phoenix to go feed Shu. This leads Phoenix to go to OnGuard's mansion and we see the killer. Now this part is very strange, because this is clearly the bellboy from the Gatewater Hotel, but Phoenix doesn't seem to notice. What makes this weird is that the stitches on his face is noted as a defining characteristic later in the case, so how does Phoenix not realize that these two people are the same? My guess is that the team just needed an easy way for the player to identify this person as the killer, so they didn't give him an elaborate disguise. Still, why doesn't Phoenix find this whole thing suspicious? OnGuard sent you to his mansion to feed his cat. However, he has a butler that can feed his cat right there. But Phoenix never thinks about any of this at any point in the investigation. And I guess the even bigger question is why Phoenix doesn't think about the bellboy at all. From our knowledge, the bellboy was the last person with Maya. The bellboy was also the person who gave Will powers to Transceiver. These facts alone put suspicion onto the bellboy. And also, why is the killer using Matt's own house as his place for storing Maya? It's a miracle that no investigation was done in Matt's house. The killer runs the risk of getting caught by holding Maya in his house. If he wants to safeguard other pieces of evidence such as the toy bear and Celeste's photo, he can just take them along with him to another location. Staying in Matt's house is probably the worst thing you can do. We also do some investigating with Gumshoe and we find a camera planted in Kurita's room, which makes this case much more interesting. And what do you know, Gumshoe and Edgeworth figure out that the person who brought the bear was Matt on guard. The suspense constantly builds up as Phoenix realizes he's in big trouble. We unmask on guard as the killer's client, and we get an awesome reveal. It's time we meet the real Matt on guard. I mean, the presentation of this reveal is amazing. The music hits, his design fits the villain very well. There's a lot of prior build-up, so yeah, it's easily one of the strongest moments in the game. Now you could point out how there's a camera here catching this all on tape, but they could be whispering in order for Matt to avoid being caught. Now let's talk about all the build up to Matt's reveal. Apart from the psych locks, I think it's very well done. The beginning of the case does a good job of making you uncertain. Yes, there is OnGuard's blatant mulling over the name the killer, but there are so many moments afterward that make you question if he's truly guilty. I mean, the game starts off presenting OnGuard as someone that looks very guilty. Characters like Gumshoe talk about how there's no doubt that he's the bad guy, and if Gumshoe says that, it usually means it's wrong. However, that's not the case here. Gumshoe was right. Matt is the bad guy. During the second investigation, they don't even try hiding it. Every single clue points to OnGuard. The fact that the killer is at his house, the camera, the bear, and the fact that the game paints Adrian out to be the victim of it all. During investigation day 2, it's clear that OnGuard is the true mastermind. Even Phoenix knew for a really long time. Although it's revealed much later, there were always signs that he knew this was not going to end well. The purpose of extending this reveal was to play on the fact that Phoenix was always hanging on to that tiny thread of hope that OnGuard was not the client. And at the very last moment, he was betrayed. That's what makes this reveal very impactful. It hits hard because even if we as the player don't want it to be true, it is the reality of the situation. It's at this point where we focus on another main topic of the case. Edgeworth tells Phoenix that he must find the answer of what it means to be a defense attorney. Edgeworth points out that Phoenix just shouted, pulled some bluffs and tricks to get his clients an innocent verdict. Phoenix believed his clients were innocent, and that's why he would go so far for them. But now he doesn't feel like he can do that. Phoenix is lost. While on a call with the killer, Phoenix and Edgeworth hear a cat, so they run to OnGuard's mansion with the police by their side. I love stuff like this where we start breaking into places, so this is a fun segment, albeit relying on the convenience of the killer not making good decisions. I mean, the way they end this investigation is just epic. Phoenix gets the dream with the judge again, and he says he will prove a guilty man innocent. Just wow. But what's 10 times better than the second investigation is the second trial. This could possibly be the best trial in the series. I'm not entirely confident about that statement, but it is a contender for sure. So what's the game plan? Stalling. That's right, our goal is to purposely drag out the trial so Gumshoe can find Maya. It's a very unique premise for a case, and I quite like it. Our first witness is Will Powers, and his character has improved drastically since the first game. Contrary to what Adrian said, he has so much more to him than just being nice. He has a lot of funny lines, such as being scared of Phoenix's tricks, his crush on Andrews, his ability to be influenced by other people's words, and his nosy behavior, such as getting into gossip or spying on Matt and the bellboy. Compare this to Will's character in Turnabout Samurai, where he was just a nice guy who had the gimmick of looking scary. Yeah, it's no contest. Will Powers in JFA wins by a long shot. Now, there are some gameplay issues. In one of Will Powers' testimonies, you have to press in a weird order. You have to press statement 4 and then press statement 3. And it really doesn't make sense why you have to do it like this. After you press statement 3, Will Powers says he thought the bellboy wasn't normal. Then in statement 4, Will Powers said it was strange that Matt on guard gave the bellboy a tip. Instead of the testimony just stopping there because Phoenix can connect what Will Powers may have thought was strange, the testimony continues. You have to go back to statement 3 and press that once again. This is not intuitive because it's something that the series has never done before, and it feels pointless to do something like this when the game easily could have progressed without it. However, I personally don't mind this gameplay, and I don't say that as someone who's replaying the game. I also didn't mind this on my first playthrough. What's good is that the game makes the statements very simple. They're statements where you can't really think of any contradictions because a lot of them are very opinionated, or they're just simple things like Powers trying to go to Matt's room. At some point, pressing statements again for hints will occur to the player as an option. I think this section is good for the fact that it still tests the player. You're not supposed to blindly spam evidence. You still have to think about what you must do. You have to notice that there are no contradictions and proceed with that knowledge to reach the correct solution. Powers does have one bad testimony where we have to present Adrian Andrews' profile to show that she could have been the nickel samurai that received the bear from the killer. However, this possibility contradicts what we previously learned about the crime. With the crime as we know it, Adrian only got the nickel samurai costume after the whole The Killer incident happened. And this contradiction in the order of events really isn't brought up, so this part doesn't make a lot of sense. However, I do like a lot of the gameplay after this. Pointing out the bellboy's delivery and the bear figurine is good. And I will say, I love the use of the people in the courtroom. It feels like the whole world is against you. People are yelling about how the defense is this cruel attorney who'll do anything for a not guilty verdict, and it hurts because you know that's not the truth. Phoenix is silently suffering in pain, while people are making him out to be the next Manfred von Karma. We take a short trial break, but suspense continues to build because Gumshoe still has no leads. Apparently Mia saw a circus tent 300 feet away when Maya channeled her. Again, this is kinda dumb because how can Mia estimate if something's 300 feet away? Also, just saying there's a mailbox under a window is not a great description at all. This part could have been cleaned up a lot more, but the suspense still remains, which is good. Suspense builds up even more as we open the toy bear and find the suicide note within it. Matt's actions are revealed to the public, and again the gallery is used well as everyone's against Phoenix. Combine this with another call from Gumshoe where we learn the killer got away, and holy crap, this trial is amazing. In our final recess, Gumshoe says he's collected a few pieces of evidence that the killer left behind. He says he's gonna rush to the courtroom, and then, oh my god, Gumshoe crashes his car. And the very last minute, just when you think the case can't get any crazier, it does. So we get the killer on the stand, which is awesome, and he names Adrian as his client. It's up to us to disprove this. The cross-examination of the killer has some unique gameplay. This time, the game introduces double pressing. Last time, you just had to press statement 4 and then statement 3. You never had to press statement 3 twice. This time, you have to press statement 2, then press statement 3, and then go back to statement 2. Again, although this is odd, I'm not gonna lie, I had a lot of fun with some of these testimonies. There is some challenge in not falling for traps set up by the game. I mean, if you don't see any contradictions in any of the statements, you can press more to get information and clues. If you do present evidence, it's your fault because technically there are no contradictions. In fact, you barely find any contradictions at all in Trial 2. The majority of Trial 2 is pressing statements, but I didn't mind because it still took some understanding to figure out when presenting was necessary, and a lot of the solutions were unique. Not every testimony boils down to, oh, press every statement. Oh wow, a new statement is added. Present evidence on the new statement. You know, it's not repetitive, and that's good. Another example is where you have to say something is not important. In Ace Attorney games, whenever they ask you if something is important or not, you always say important. Frankly, I don't know why a lot of these small option prompts exist. 99% of the time, you will choose the same options over and over again. Do you want to add the statement to your testimony? Well, no shit. Everyone chooses yes because now there's more information to work with. Do you want to press further? Well, yeah, because again, people want more information, and most likely, it's the only way we can progress with the case. So we get to JFA case 4, and saying it's not important is refreshing. Again, if you make mistakes in that time, it's your fault because there's truly no contradictions in the testimony. Pressing it's not important is another option given to you, so once you've exhausted all options, that's all you have left to try, and look at that, it did something. I feel like this gameplay continues to build on that intensity that Farrell My Turnabout had in their first trial. Every testimony feels like it can make me game over, and trying to preserve the life bar is really fun. Now I'm still really bothered by the fact that they don't talk about how Adrian having a costume at this point contradicts what we previously learned. At some point, you try to show that it's impossible that Adrian was the one who received the bear. Well, now there's multiple problems, and it's hard to pinpoint what problem the game wants you to point out. What you're supposed to do is present the suicide note because Adrian would surely take it out and burn it. But what about the problem with the Nickel Samurai costume as I mentioned earlier? At some point, it's confusing as to what the game wants from you because there's so much that's wrong. I will say, Phoenix's struggle continues to be amazing. The whole court witnesses his stress as he screams out loud. Edgeworth is also powerless and just stops trying. And soon after, we have what might be the strongest moment of the case. We actually have to choose, guilty or not guilty. I still remember the first time I played this. I remember taking forever to decide which option to choose. Let me tell you guys why this part is so brilliant. I am one of the biggest Maya fans out there. She's my favorite character in all of Ace Attorney, and in this guilty or not guilty scenario, it seems like a no-brainer that I would pick Maya. Look, I don't want Adrian to be incarcerated or hung to death. I'm actually not sure what the punishment is, but either way, it will be something bad. However, I've known Maya for a lot longer, meaning I'm more concerned about her safety, and her death feels more certain than Adrian's. But I think Shu Takumi realized that this would be the case for many players, and so he made a brilliant move. He gets Maya to tell Phoenix to get a not guilty no matter what. This evens out the playing field a bit more. Okay, you might want to save Maya no matter what, but what if Maya herself is telling you to choose otherwise? It's a really good move, and it got me thinking a lot. And then, we get another amazing moment. When the situation is at its worst, Franziska walks in and delivers the last 3 pieces of evidence. This is another fantastic climactic moment. Hopes are up high, and we have one last puzzle where we have to present the right piece of evidence to the right person. And I love how there's 2 endings. If you get this part wrong, there's this really funny ending due to a spelling error, but even looking past that, I think the ending is good from a story aspect. Unable to face Maya or anyone for that matter, Phoenix runs away from it all. It does leave a strong impact. And if you get this part right, you get this satisfying scene where you can save both Adrian and Maya, which leaves Enguarde fearing for his life. And I love how you can pick guilty or not guilty. The not guilty dialogue is so good because Phoenix is literally allowing Enguarde to die, and it makes Enguarde pleading for his life so much more satisfying. Now getting back to our big decision before Franziska interrupted us, we had the option of a not guilty or a guilty verdict. I love this moment so much because of player input. People often say that this is Phoenix's case. Out of every case in the series, this is the one that develops Phoenix the most. It's the case that allows him to realize that finding the truth is what's most important. But I don't really agree. After all, how can we say the truth really is the most important thing? At the end of the case, Mia does say that whichever option you picked is what being a lawyer means to you. Phoenix has no canon choice. He doesn't side with the truth or saving Maya because it's the many players controlling him that get to choose what's most important to them. So how can we say that the truth is the most important thing to Phoenix? We can't. In fact, looking at Phoenix's character, this is a guy that was always concerned about justice. From the very beginning of the case, he always had justice in mind. Phoenix never leaned very closely to the side of saving Maya and then slowly learned that the truth is also important. No, he had this dilemma from the very beginning. This is why, when I think of Farewell My Turnabout, I don't think of it as the case where Phoenix got a crazy amount of development. I always think about it as the player's case. This is the case I personally felt the most connected to, as it allowed me to make so many crazy decisions. It allowed me to understand myself and what I would do in a moral dilemma. Now, the very fact that this is a game can interfere with this. For example, because this is a game, you might be influenced to pick a certain option because you want the case to progress. So although I do prefer to have a not guilty with Adrian being convicted and with Maya being free, the first time I played this case, I actually picked guilty because I thought it was the only way to progress further. That being said, this is totally fine. You can still reflect on what you would pick if you weren't thinking of this from a gaming perspective. I think this is the main message of Farewell My Turnabout. It's finding out what being a lawyer means to you personally, and we all get to figure that out through Phoenix and this crazy case. So hopefully you guys understand why I think this choice is the best part of the entire case, and why I find this ending to be so strong. And seeing the reunion between Phoenix, Maya, and Pearl is amazing. There are a lot of feel-good moments at the end. It's great to see Gumshoe alive and well, and it's great to see him getting credit for taking the 3 pieces of evidence. But we also learn that there's a 4th piece. Even as the case is ending, it creates more intrigue. Like, that's actually insane writing. It's also nice to see all the minor characters and Edgeworth getting along with everyone else. We get the classic Phoenix getting wrecked scene, and some beautiful end credits. After that fantastic ending, you'd think the case would be done. But no, the case continues to pull punches. We get one last conversation with Edgeworth and Franziska in the airport. Franziska becomes vulnerable and lets all her feelings out. She talks about how her expectations were too high and how she could never live up to her legacy. Edgeworth convinces Franziska that she can change and become her own person instead of following others, and this leads to Franziska breaking down. Again, the presentation is used well. We see Franziska cry for the first time, and it caught me by surprise. And they never forgot about the 4th piece of evidence. Franziska announces her return and shows Maya's drawing of Nick, which is a perfect way to end the game. The last hour of this case is a 10 out of 10. It might even be the peak of the series, but I'm not sure if I can say that because there is another somewhat long segment in a future game that I think might be better, but it doesn't change the fact that it's one of the best things in the series. In fact, I'd even go as far as to say that the final 2 hours of this case is close to perfect. The last trial is amazing despite some of its downfalls. If anything, I can confidently say that it's the peak of JFA. However, if I were to look at the case as a whole, I no longer think this is the best case in the series. If I were to rate this case, I'd give it a 9 out of 10 and put it in the phenomenal tier. Yes, it ends so well, and that ending was just as good as the first time I saw it. But a lot of the case before that is honestly not that special. The case is good throughout, but it's not consistently amazing. I mainly say this because of day 1. Revisiting this case, I feel like it only becomes top tier once we find the camera in the bear's eye. The first 60% of the case is still good, but it's nowhere near the standard of what I would consider to be amazing. The case also does have its fair share of issues, as I've pointed out over the course of the video, so that's why it's no longer a 10. Trust me when I say this, but we will see a much stronger case later in the series. So where does JFA stand? Do I still think it's one of the better games in the series? Well, yeah. I had a blast playing through JFA. Sure, Case 1 wasn't the best start, but it's fine, and honestly Case 1 doesn't play a huge part in how I feel about the game, just because of how small it is. And like I said before, Cases 2 to 4 left a lot of impact on me, and that is a fact that hasn't changed. I think overall, JFA has quite a few things that put it over its predecessor. I think the biggest factor is the moment-to-moment writing. JFA had much more immersive dialogue. First of all, I thought the humor was much better. I don't know how to explain the first game style of humor, but it feels much more random and more meme-like. For example, a common line that I see gets thrown around is when Edward says objection and says that was objectionable. Like, I don't know, apparently a lot of people find this funny, but that just doesn't do anything for me. Another line that's become a meme is the outdated autopsy report, and again, this was like just a normal line that shows some of Edward's devious tactics early on, but in no way did I think this was laugh out loud comedy. By contrast, JFA's humor feels more natural and better integrated into conversations. So one example I gave back in case 2 was where we see Morgan gets angry when Phoenix doesn't refer to Pearl by her proper title, and then Phoenix says he'll be the one that's spirit channeled next. I feel like that type of comedy just arises more naturally and feels like it's there more often. I don't know if I explained that well, but I do think JFA is better in that regard. I also think JFA is better in terms of character writing. Now there are quite a few times where I think JFA sinks lower than the first game, but as a whole, I do think JFA wins. Phoenix improves in some ways and falls short in others. Again, I don't like any of his whining about Edgeworth. It feels so melodramatic, and I just wince in pain while looking at some of those scenes. However, I do like how they made him dumb. That might sound weird because I complained about the whole The Killer thing, but the The Killer thing was just bad because he never thought about that at all. When I say making him dumb made him better, I'm referring more to his dorkiness and how that makes him more funny. Some of you who watched my review for the first Turnabout may remember how I was surprised about how competent Phoenix was. And now I understand why I was shocked. It's cause the guy is dumb in Justice for All. Sure, he had those moments in the first game where he'd revealed decisive pieces of evidence to the killers, but other than that, he was fairly clever. However, in JFA, everyone's ahead of the guy. Like, even Pearl has to guide him a lot of the time, and even Mia is surprised by how clueless he is. But honestly, there's a charm to that. I love dorky Phoenix, so I really love this change. I also think it makes turning around the case much more fun, because all of a sudden, this guy who doesn't seem so clever is suddenly about to win the case. And yeah, it's awesome to see. So overall, I like Phoenix about the same as I did in game 1. Franziska is fine. I think she fulfills her role as a prosecutor well. Like when she's in the courtroom, it gives off a different feeling than when Edgeworth is in the courtroom. The battles against her do feel more intense. You can tell that she really does want to win. Franziska is obviously a bit harder to empathize with for me personally. Like, you know, the whole getting a perfect record to meet expectations, even though you'll ruin lives if you get the wrong person convicted. But I do think her arc in the final case is done well. It's not amazing, but it's sufficient. You get to see how she feels that no one understands her, and with her conversation at the end, you can see that she does want to change, even though that change hasn't occurred yet. And I think that's fine. She developed a little bit, but it is taking her a longer time to change than Edgeworth. And I think that's quite realistic, as Franziska was even further in the whole perfect record world than Edgeworth was. Overall, not as good as Edgeworth was in the first game, but still solid. Then we got Pearl, and what an amazing character. Having a character that doesn't know much about the world is great, and it's awesome to see her learn more throughout the game. She always has good dialogue with Phoenix and Maya, and the character is just consistently good. There really isn't a moment where Pearl's on the screen and I'm thinking, yeah, she's just okay. No, it's just good moment after good moment, and that's why Pearl is my favorite character in JFA. I think JFA also does a better job with side characters than AA1. Morgan, Mimi, Acro, Mo, and The Killer are just a few that I think are better than most side characters from the first game. But hey, I think Ace Attorney is strong with character writing in general, so the first game isn't bad at all in this department. And I'm finally done. Yes, I had a lot to say. JFA was a game that was rushed. Shu Takumi barely had time to write these cases. For context, he wrote 4 cases in 4 months for the first game. However, with Justice for All, he had to write 5 cases in 3.5 months. And these 5 cases are beefier than those of the first game. It's essentially double the work in less time. And look at that, one of his cases couldn't even be in the game due to cartridge limitations, and had to be added to Trials and Tribulations. All I can say is, the miracle happened. It's crazy that JFA turned out to be as amazing as it is. Well, for me anyway. I know a lot of people don't like this game that much, but hey, even if a lot of people don't like this game, I'm sure many recognize how impressive this is. And hey, this game took some pressure off of Trials and Tribulations. People often regard Trials and Tribulations as the best game, and Shu Takumi's hard work allowed Trials and Tribulations to get a head start by using one of his pre-made cases. Obviously, changes had to be made in order to implement a recipe for Turnabout into that game, but it's still a huge head start nonetheless. In fact, I view both the JFA and the first game to be legendary. This isn't even my nostalgia talking, it's just crazy how good these games are. The first game was almost scrapped due to limited staff members, but they still managed to pull it off. And JFA was rushed, but they pulled that off as well. Both of these games paved the way for the well-acclaimed third game of the trilogy. But I'm not going to cover that game next. No, because I'm doing things in a strange order. I'm covering the Great Ace Attorney 2 next. Trials and Tribulations will be covered after the Great Ace Attorney 2 is finished, so stay tuned for both of these in the upcoming months. I'm not sure when I'll release them, but hopefully the wait isn't too long. And with all of this being said and done, goodbye.